Good morning, conference. We're about to start the next session, so will people please take their seats? Good morning. We are now moving on to item F16, the two emergency motions. We are taking both of them in this session. The first one, F16A on Navalny, and the second one, 16B on Rwanda. And we'll take them both together in the same session. So on 16A, you will find the text of the emergency motion starting on page 3 of Conference Daily. I'm going to ask two speakers to stand by. Would Sean McLeod from East Hampshire stand by to be the next speaker? And the speaker after that is Richard Whelan from Basingstoke, who needs wheelchair access. So would he go to the left-hand side of the stage as you're looking at it? Thank you, Richard. But now it gives me great pleasure to call to move the motion Christine Jardine, MP for Edinburgh West.
Good morning, conference, or at least morning. I don't know about the good bit. Thinking about this motion and what to say today, a lot of words came to me one at a time. First of all, I thought about Alexei Navalny, and the word that came to mind immediately was courage. Courage to go back and face what he knew would be certain death. Putin's regime had tried to kill him once before, and he hadn't long got out of hospital, but January 21, he went back, knowing that it would probably mean the end. But that was his commitment to democracy and change in Russia. And that made me think about what he faced when he went back: torture, imprisonment in the Arctic colony, and who knows what kind of punishment they put him through. For his family, that meant tragedy, a personal tragedy, a personal loss for his wife and his mother. And wasn't it horrible what they put her through over his body and the cause of his death? But for all of us, Navalny stands as a warning. He embodies everything that we should regard as a threat to our democracy. A threat which we've seen played out in Ukraine, and a threat which they're feeling right across Eastern Europe. Last week, I met some Belarusians as part of a visit organised by the John Smith Centre programme. And they told me just how difficult life has been for them, not just in Belarusia, but in moving around the rest of what was Eastern Europe, Poland, Lithuania, and how scared everyone there is that Putin will turn on them next. So, conference, we have this motion which will commit us to standing up to that threat, to facing that danger head on, and having something of the courage of our convictions that Alexei Navalny had. We don't face the same sort of threat that he did, but there is a threat from Russia. And the first thing that we have to do is embody in law the support for the other victims of Putin, the other democratic activists, like Carmichael, who are in prison in Russia at the moment. I've got a private member's bill, which is waiting to go before the House if we don't have a general election. So I'm a bit torn about that one. But I have a private member's bill waiting to go before the House, which would embody in law the right of British citizens to have consular assistance if they're imprisoned and have their human rights and their civil rights protected. Because believe it or not, we don't have that. Believe it or not, it's up to the consulate whether or not they support you and what support they give you. So what we want embodied in law and what the bill calls for is a legal guarantee that you will have that consular support, that you will have legal assistance, that they will protect your rights, that they will protect you from unfair imprisonment. You won't be forced to sign a false confession, that you won't be detained without any legal representation, that you will have visits and that you will have medical aid. Because at the moment, democratic activists in Russia, British nationals, because remember, Carmichael is a dual national Briton, do not have that protection. But immediately we also need this government to carry through on the sanctions against those on the Navalny list who are responsible for his detainment, capture in the Arctic Circle. We also need now the government to seize those Russian assets which they have talked about for so long and which could be used in the fight against Ukraine. Conference, that's why this is an important motion. Because as well as taking those immediate steps, it will say quite clearly that we still stand and will continue to stand with Ukraine as the country stands up to Putin. We need those assets to be frozen, we need them to be seized, and we need to repurpose the interest on them to fight the war in Ukraine. So, conference, please, support this and give us another word that we can use against Vladimir Putin.
Thank you, Christine. Would Richard Whelan from Basingstoke please stand by? And now call to speak in favour of the motion, Sian MacLeod from East Hampshire.
Good morning, everybody. Alexei Navalny was an extraordinarily brave human being. His slow assassination by persecution, poisoning, isolation, and deliberate lack of care adds another tragic line to a roll of honour that includes Anna Politkovskaya, Alexandra Litvinenko, and far too many others. Securing the release of Vladimir Kara-Murza and returning him to safety must remain a high priority for the UK. We should also today condemn the brutal attack this week on Leonid Volkov in Vilnius and remember the very many ordinary Russians whose names are mostly unknown to us, who day by day are intimidated and persecuted by Vladimir Putin and his corrupt, inhumane regime that fears democracy and liberal values. On one point in the motion, I'm not sure I have enough information before me to take a view on NCA funding, but that aside, where there can be no doubt is that Putin's barbaric, destructive and illegal aggression continues at massive cost to the people of his own country, as well as wreaking unimaginable suffering on the country and people of Ukraine. Putin hopes the world will stop caring. It's right that we today here make clear once again that this is not going to happen. I strongly welcome and support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Sian. Would Edward Lucas from Westminster please stand by? Now called to speak in favour of the motion, Richard Whelan. Richard is PPC for Basingstoke.
Thank you. I'm not surprised that Alexei Navalny was assassinated. What surprises me more is that it didn't happen earlier. Putin will stop at nothing. In attacking his internal opponents and his external enemies. The fact is, the institutional architecture in Europe is not fit for purpose. It was built in the aftermath of the Cold War for the reasons of the Cold War. If we are going to counter the threat from Putin, and also potentially the threat from a second Trump presidency, we need a new institutional architecture that will include elements of the EU, elements of NATO, and elements of the OSCE, so that we've got the political, economic, military, and security means to protect ourselves. This is something that needs to be debated in full at a future conference. But I just thought I'd bring it up now because unless we start thinking about these things, other internal dissidents in Russia and other countries such as Ukraine could be at threat. It's something I think the Federal Policy Committee will have to deal with in the aftermath of our general election. But all I say now, support this motion to end this barbarity from Putin.
Thank you very much, Richard. Would David Chalmers from North Hertfordshire and Stevenage stand by to submit? And now call to speak in favour of the motion Edward Lucas, who is PPC for, I think it's City of London and Westminster.
Hello, conference. I'm number 5, fifth equal, on a list of enemies of Russia. I'm banned, I think banned for life, from going to the Russian Federation, a place that I used to live in. I've seen my colleague Anna Politkovskaya gunned down on Putin's birthday. I've seen my friend Boris Nemtsov murdered, and now my fellow campaigner against dirty money, Alexei Navalny, dying a kind of torture death in a Russian prison. The last time I saw Navalny, he was in London, and I asked him, what do you say, Alexei, to people who say you're anti-Western? And this is quite a loaded question, because there's all this idea that Navalny had unsavory links with nationalists in Russia and so on. He said, yes, of course I'm anti-Western. I'm particularly anti-British, and I'll tell you why. Because it's in this country and in this city that you launder the money that is stolen from my country. And he was right. We should be ashamed of this. And our reaction to Navalny's death should not be posturing and press releases and high indignation and jumping on the high moral ground. We should be dealing with the bankers, the lawyers, the fixers, the grifters, the creeps, the people who go first class on the Kremlin gravy train, the people who created this monster and who did so at huge benefit to themselves and at great cost to our country and even greater cost to the countries around Russia. But there's something else we need to do. We need to decolonize our view of Russia. Our view of what's going on in the countries of so-called Eastern Europe is far too Russia-centered. We overfocus, I'm sorry to say, on the heroic, big-name dissidents, including my friend Vladimir Kara-Murza and the great campaign that his wife Yevgenia is running. But she's absolutely clear on this. The real opposition to Putin is not brave individuals in remote corners of Russia pouring green dye into ballot boxes. There is only one serious opposition to Putin, and that is the armed forces of Ukraine. If they win, Ukraine has a chance to be a free and independent country. We all sleep safer in our beds. NATO is safer, the EU is safer, the frontline states is safer, we're all safer, and there is a chance that military defeat will lead to political change in Russia. And if Ukraine breaks under the incessant, ruthless bombardment that overwhelms their air defenses, the shortage of ammunition that's leaving their frontline crumbling, then it's not only Ukraine that suffers, so does Russia, and God help us all.
Thank you, Edward. After the next speech, we're moving to the vote, so would you get your voting cards ready? For anyone watching online, the vote will be open during the summation speech. So I now call to sum up on the motion David Chalmers, who's Chair of the Federal International Relations Committee.
Good morning, conference. This motion is a really important one for us, and I just want to say that for our party, it is something which we have been really involved with the Russian and the Ukrainians through our sister parties and the work that we're doing. I met earlier this week with the Russian Democratic Society, who are behind part of the campaign which is happening today during the elections. At 12 o'clock today, brave Russians are out there showing their opposition to Putin by turning up at 12 o'clock at midday outside their embassies around the world and also outside the polling stations. Putin has already said he's going to arrest anyone that does that. And Navalny embodied that spirit and that courage of actually opposing what is going on in Russia. And we mustn't forget that there are people there, like our own sister party, Yabloko, who are trying to actually find a way of opposing him. The campaign, apparently there is a word cat in Russian that sounds the same as who. So if you see any cats, pictures of cats today all over, it is because that is a way for the Russians to show that their opposition to Putin. But as others have pointed out today, it is really hard for them to be able to do so. Navalny, Kara-Murza, others that have ended up dead, imprisoned, have actually tried to stand up against him. So we have as a party, I think this motion is really good. It does, as Christine pointed out, it offers three things. It offers us a way of being able to protect our citizens in Russia, like Kara-Murza and others, that they have consular facilities. It offers the opportunity to seize the assets of those Russians, and as Ed has pointed out, the lawyers, the bankers who are actually helping and financing Russia and enabling Russia to actually economy to grow. So we need to be able to do something about that to support Ukraine. Others have sort of pointed out to me, like for Sean, talked about Navalny's courage. We heard from Richard talking about that we probably need a new structure of institutions. Maybe that's what we need to do. We talked from Ed about the importance for Ukraine to win this war. It's our war that they're fighting. And also, again, the importance of actually seizing those assets. So I call on you this morning, conference, to please support this motion and to think of those Russians and the Ukrainians who are actually outside the country and inside the country opposing Putin. I'm leading our delegation next week to Brussels to meet with our sister parties from across Europe. And I will be taking this motion, part of it, to them, because we need to be able to get the support of our sister parties behind this, to actually support Russia, those Russians opposing Putin, but also to ensure that we continue our support for Ukraine. And in that, as I said at the beginning, we are quite unique. The other political parties, I hear this from the Ukrainians and from the Russians, have said that they do not have the same support as they do from us. And we should be proud as a party for what we are doing to stand up for them and the way that we are connecting with them. So this motion to me is another signal that we actually do care about what is happening. We are making a stand about it. We will try to lead our Labour and the Conservatives, but we'll also lead our sister parties around Europe to take the same stand as us. So thank you. Please vote for it.
Thank you very much, David. We now move to the vote on motion F16A, Navalny. You'll see the text of the motion on pages 3 and 4 of Conference Daily. So can I now see all those voting in favour of the motion? Thank you very much. And can I now see all those voting against the motion? So I can't see anyone, and there's no one online either. So that motion is very clearly carried. Thank you very much. Okay, we now move on to motion F16B, Beyond Rwanda, a fairer way forward on asylum. You'll see the text on pages 5 and 6 of Conference Daily. So could I ask Bradley Hillier-Smith from Edinburgh North East and Leith to stand by? And now call to move the motion Max Wilkinson, who is PPC for Cheltenham.
Good morning, Conference. We experienced the only thing more disturbing than Glee Club last night. That was our baby screaming at us into the early hours. So forgive me if I look a little bleary-eyed. I came to this country to find safety. I didn't speak a single word of English, and I didn't know where I was. I wanted to buy bread, but I didn't know how. That was the way one of Cheltenham's refugee population described his arrival in this country. I can tell you that thanks to the work of our friends at Cheltenham Welcomes Refugees, he's been able to build a life in our town. He earns a living, he pays taxes. We can be proud of that as a country. I'm proud of the work that Cheltenham does to support refugees. But sadly, if he arrived in this country today, it would be illegal. The Conservatives would send him on a one-way trip to Rwanda with little care for how he might be treated when he gets there. They will characterise this policy as a strong deterrent. But as Liberals, we know it is weak. We know it is also shameful, immoral, unworkable, and unlawful. But even if you think it is none of those things, you cannot argue with the fact that it is hugely expensive and wasteful. The amount spent on this scheme so far could have paid for 95 million free school meals, 5.7 million GP appointments, or even, logically, 6,000 Home Office staff to help manage the backlog of asylum and refugee cases. More than £200 million has been handed over to the Rwandan government, and in return, all this country has achieved is the souring of the public debate and the degradation of our country's reputation around the world. That is an absolute disgrace. And all for a scheme that we are told could initially accommodate only 200 asylum seekers. That doesn't even scratch the surface. Conference, this policy is cowardly. It is fundamentally un-British. It strikes at the heart of everything that we liberal internationalists stand for. It pains us that our country has been reduced by the Conservative Party to the point at which we are willing to treat the world's most desperate people so utterly heartlessly. And in this election year, let it motivate us to get rid of this dreadful Conservative government. Now, for me, that means working to defeat Cheltenham's current MP, the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk. Now, people will tell you that he's one of these liberal and moderate Conservative MPs. And when he was first elected, he did something fairly liberal. He became a patron of Gloucestershire Action for Refugees and Asylum Seekers. Well, since then he's been on something of a journey, it's fair to say. He's voted consistently against the rights of asylum seekers and refugees. He's written columns about migration with Suella Braverman. And now, along with his colleagues, he parrots the idiotic phrase, "stop the boats." He even defended Lee Anderson's F off back to France comments, and I quote, as absolutely fine. He probably feels a bit daft about that now. I'm afraid, Conference, those are not the actions of a Liberal, and Cheltenham deserves Liberal representation. But what would we do differently? People often say, what do you stand for, Liberals? Well, let's be really clear. We'd reaffirm this country's commitments to human rights, including the European Convention on Human Rights and the UN Refugee Convention. We'd tackle the asylum backlog and fix the broken system by establishing a new dedicated unit to make decisions quickly and fairly. We'd reopen the safe and legal routes to claim asylum that the Conservatives closed. We'd do that because it's right and because we know it's the strongest way that we can beat the criminal gangs. We'd let asylum seekers work so they can take an active part in our economy, like my friend in Cheltenham, and that they can live fulfilling lives while they await due process. And Conference, we would scrap the cruel, heartless and cowardly Rwanda policy. Conference, sometimes our opponents criticise us as weak. They say we Liberals are pushovers, all while they play the strongman card, stirring division and hatred. Well, there is absolutely nothing strong about repeated failure. There is nothing strong about incompetence, and there is nothing strong about turning the screw on the world's most desperate people. That is not strength, that makes you a bully. It takes strength to show compassion. It takes strength to lift up those in need. It takes strength to stand up to bullies. That is exactly what Liberals do, and that is what we are doing today. And that is what this motion calls for. And, conference, that is what this country does when it is at its best. Conference, back this motion to show that we care, that we are strong in our liberal internationalist values, and that we know what is right. And with every door you knock and every leaflet you drop between now and election day, know that you're doing it for a worthy and just cause. Liberals can help return this country to its best, and that is exactly what we will do. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you very much, Max. Would Ruvi Ziegler from Oxford East please stand by? And now call to speak in favour of the motion, Bradley Hillier-Smith from North Edinburgh, East and Leith.
Thank you. Conference, we're living in troubling times. Around the world, countries are shutting their doors to refugees seeking safety. And the UK is no exception. Instead of offering safe routes and hope to those who need it most, our government seeks to criminalise those who seek safety, detain them in appalling conditions or in floating prisons, and close down routes so that their only means of reaching safety in the UK is to risk their lives on dangerous channel crossings. And even if they make it here, they are then threatened with deportation against their will to Rwanda. Political parties in the UK are also turning their backs. The Conservatives stoke fear, division, and demonisation against vulnerable people. And Labour cannot be trusted to even come out and clearly oppose the inhumanity of this government's policies and the Rwanda scheme itself. The Liberal Democrats, then, are the only ones poised to stand up for the rights, humanity, and dignity of refugees. And this motion today, as well as the amendment passed to the Liberal Values motion yesterday, is our chance to do just that. So yes, we must reject this Rwanda scheme, but this by itself is not enough. We can and must do more. Instead, in its place, we must provide a bold alternative, an ethical and humane response to those seeking safety through unique policies as Liberal Democrats. So our policy of the creation of humanitarian visas will provide nothing less than a lifeline as an alternative to the dangerous journeys that cost the lives of innocents. The commitment to family reunification ensures that refugee families separated by the trauma of displacement have the opportunity to be safe together. The expansion of resettlement schemes to resettle at least 10,000 refugees each year, as well as 10,000 unaccompanied refugee children, will provide safety and security to some of the world's most vulnerable refugees. And the sponsorship schemes will ensure the UK offers pathways to safety, not just for Ukrainian refugees who deserve it, but for all refugees, no matter their place of birth, who are just as in need and entitled to equal protection. So these policies show that an ethical response to refugees is not only possible, but within our reach, and it's something we must fight for. And so with this motion and these policy commitments, we have a chance to do what no other party has the courage and moral conviction to do. Stand up for the rights and dignity of refugees, not just by rejecting the Rwanda scheme, but in its place, providing unique policies that offer hope. And in doing so, we can say loud and clear that we as a party and as a country will not be the ones who turn our backs, but that refugees are indeed welcome here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bradley. Would Philip Benyon from Lichfield, Tamworth and Burton please stand by? And now call to speak in favour of the motion, Dr. Ruvi Ziegler from Oxford East.
Hi, good morning, Conference. The Rwanda plan is a farce in 3 stages. The first one was the government passing the Nationality and Borders Act, creating a 2-tier system of refugees, which, by the way, they never actually put in place, and enabling the Rwanda plan. Then the Supreme Court finds this plan to be unlawful. Our Supreme Court, not a foreign court. Then the government signs a treaty which a cross-party Lords International Agreements Committee recommends not to ratify until Parliament is satisfied that the protections that it provides have been fully implemented. And why that? Well, you ask, because the Safety of Rwanda bill asks Parliament to determine Rwanda is safe just a few weeks after our Supreme Court said it is clearly not. And lest we forget that in 2023, several asylum seekers received protection in the United Kingdom because they faced persecution in Rwanda. The Rwanda plan, really, as a lawyer, is outrageous on multiple levels. First, you've got a UK global north country paying a global south country to both determine asylum applications and then to host them if they're found to be eligible for asylum. This isn't just processing, it is taking responsibility for them. And this is a manifest act of counter-responsibility sharing. Second, unlike under EU law, where if you remove someone from the EU to a third country, they need to have a relevant connection to that country. In the case of the people we plan to send to Rwanda, they have never been, in most cases, even on the African continent. Thirdly, those that get removed to Rwanda, even if they're found to be refugees under the Rwanda system, face a lifetime ban of coming to the UK just for daring to seek asylum here. Fourthly, the government admits on the face of the bill that it is likely to breach the European Convention of Human Rights. It then authorizes ministers to ignore orders by the European Court of Human Rights to stop deportations, and it then expects civil servants to comply with illegal deportation orders. And finally, and to top it all, the government tells our own Supreme Court and other courts that they would not be able to find Rwanda is unsafe, even if the facts point in that direction. So as Bradley has already mentioned, I think, there is another way possible. I was proud to propose the amendment yesterday to the foreign policy debate. We need to introduce humanitarian visa with applications from outside the UK. We need community and individual sponsorship and family visa schemes for all nationalities. We need to extend resettlement schemes so the UK takes genuinely its fair share. And we need to reach new agreements with the EU to replace Dublin that we, because of Brexit, no longer are part of. But fundamentally and above all, we need to stop criminalizing seekers of sanctuary for exercising their right to seek asylum from persecution. Please support this motion.
Thank you very much, Ruby. Would Suzanne Fletcher from Stockton please stand by? I now call to speak in favour of the motion Phil Bennion from Lichfield, Tamworth and Burton, and Phil is also Vice President of Liberal International.
Thank you, Duncan. I'm going to concentrate on the situation inside Rwanda, which I think is lines 21 to 25. I mean, the efforts of this Tory government in trying to legislate Rwanda as a safe country, not just despicable, but they're also absurd. A safe country must be a country that it is safe for political opposition to carry out its business. Rwanda is no such place. In fact, we even accept political refugees from Rwanda because of that fact. Now, one political activist that Jeremy Purvis brought to our attention in the International Relations Committee is Mrs. Victoire Ingabire Umuhoza. Now, she actually was trying to stand as a presidential candidate against Paul Kagame in 2010. She was not only banned from doing that, but she was given a 15-year prison sentence. And in that election in 2010, rather predictably, the only people who stood against Kagame were 3 of his supporters. And where have we seen that before? This prison sentence was effectively, she was released in 2018, and she has now formed a new political party. And at the moment, she has actually been campaigning against the UK-Rwanda deal from within Rwanda. She's been very, very courageous and had death threats and is putting her own life at risk because of her activities. Now, in my role as Vice President of LI, I took part in more than once in the Africa Liberal Network's General Assembly. And there I was talking to many different African politicians about the Rwanda situation. And there was one in particular, Samuel Kimanuka from Burundi, who has written books about the Kagame regime. He's an academic who is the principal expert on that. And he could not believe that the British government was proposing to send asylum seekers to Rwanda. It actually offended him because he felt that Britain had this reputation as being the upholder, the international upholder of international law, and it was so reputationally damaging that he really called on us, the British government, to review its position. Now, as far as Mrs. Umahosa is concerned, we are now about to nominate her for the Liberal International Prize for Freedom, which it's open at the moment. Last year, we actually nominated Vladimir Kara-Murza successfully, and that's the next job that we have. But please, President Kagame may have some support in Rwanda, but that does not make it a safe country. It does not make it safe. It may be safe for tourists, but it's certainly not safe for members of the opposition and for opposition politics. So please vote for this motion, and let's try and end this absurd proposal that the Conservatives have really got themselves caught up in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Phil. Would Sally Burnell from Waltham Forest please stand by? And now call to speak in favour of the motion, Suzanne Fletcher from Stockton.
Good morning. I'm quite privileged to be able to stand here to speak against the disgusting Rwanda bill that's not in our name. But in particular, I wanted to speak about lines 34, about the ballooning backlog of asylum applications here. We've got substantial, radical, agreed Liberal Democrat policies. Decision-making, the full page of it, you can get it on the Liberal Democrats for Seekers of Sanctuary stand. But basically, it's talking about a new and dedicated unit for asylum applications, independent of government, to improve the speed and the quality of decision-making, taking the political influence out of this decision-making, and moving towards a caseworker model of support to make sure that we've got better trained staff who will deal directly with everybody who is victims of torture, trafficking, mentally ill, pregnant women, children, LGBT plus people. Also ensure that civil servants are at the right level to be able to make those decisions. They need proper training. We need targets that are met in actually processing those applications. We have to move away from the culture we have of disbelieving anything that any asylum says and deal with it with justice. We need to improve the appeals process, transfer the costs to the Ministry of Justice to a new dedicated unit for asylum applications. For goodness sake, can't they get it right first time? 67% of those who appeal are actually upheld. 67%. That means they were wrong decisions, and that's only those that are actually able to make the appeal. It saves time, it saves money, and it stops the prolonged misery that we have. So we need to review and reform all of the current asylum rules and operations. The system's riddled with nasty, unfair elements that the government ministers continue to defend and come up with the ridiculous and expensive and inhumane schemes of sending people off to Rwanda. But not only that, we need to stop people coming here in the first place in a dangerous small boat, as Bradley and Ruby have talked about. Humanitarian visas. Our party needs to speak about that, tell people about it. They shouldn't be even coming on a small boat. These applications could be dealt with where people actually are. Family reunion visas, so we haven't got children, anybody, coming over so that they can be with their relatives. And just another thing about detention. We actually bang people up in indefinite detention. We shouldn't have to do that. There are alternatives to detention. There are pilot schemes that the government hasn't actually taken up and taken on. There's real alternatives. So the answer is a liberal and democratic one. It's actually cheaper if any Conservatives are listening to this. We need to do it with compassion, humanity and justice. Let's talk about it, let's say it, but in the next government, make sure that we can do it.
Thank you, Suzanne. Would Danny Chambers from Winchester stand by to summate on the motion? And now call to speak in favour of the motion, Sally Burnell from Waltham Forest.
Thanks very much. Good morning, conference. Oh, late night. The Safety of Rwanda bill is immoral, it's desperate, it's xenophobic, it's dehumanising, and it drives a coach and horses through the rule of law and the separation of powers. I get that those last two aren't the most electorally friendly concepts. No one's putting "Save the separation of powers" on a campaign poster, but I think it's one of the most worrying elements. It's the constant erosion by the Conservatives of our constitutional principles, the principles that protect your rights and mine, through this populist government pushing through populist policies like this truly terrible bill. Our court system, despite its bad press at the moment because of the backlogs and the delays to justice, our court system exists to give every single person the chance to exercise their rights. Well, as we've heard, the Rwanda bill sticks two fingers up at the courts. It says, you may have heard through due process that Rwanda is, in fact, not a safe country, but that doesn't fit with our plan, so we're just going to override it because it suits us and our political ambitions, by passing a law to say that it is safe. And I can't explain it better than one former Supreme Court judge who said, the government cannot claim that black is white. But right now it appears that they can, and they're going to stop at nothing to push this through. I don't know how many of you heard the name of Jacqueline McKenzie. Jacqueline McKenzie is a leading solicitor working in immigration law. When she had the audacity to represent asylum seekers, her clients, against the Home Office, Conservative Central Office compiled a ridiculous and completely inaccurate dossier designed to embarrass and denigrate her, and they fed it into the right-wing media. A cynical ploy designed to discredit a lawyer who was simply doing her job for extremely vulnerable people who needed legal representation. Sadly, and in light of the news that we've had in the last week, it's not going to surprise anyone to find out that Jacqueline McKenzie is a black woman. The nasty party strikes again. And as to Labour, all I can say is shame on you. As Dick Newby, our leader in the House of Lords, said yesterday, Labour peers had the chance to join with us and stop this appalling and unconstitutional legislation at second reading, but they didn't. What is the point of the official opposition if they can't even muster the care or the votes to stop something this bad? Only the Liberal Democrats can be trusted to stand up for human rights, dignity, and the rule of law. And as Layla said in her truly extraordinary speech yesterday, when we say we believe in international law, we mean it. Safe and legal routes and international collaboration are the only way forward. Refugees are welcome here. Please support this motion.
Thank you very much, Sally. After the next speaker, we're moving to the vote, so please get your voting cards ready. And for those of you watching online, the vote will be open in just a few seconds, and you can vote during the summation speech. So now, to summate on the motion, it gives me pleasure to call Danny Chambers, who is PPC for Winchester.
Thank you, and that was very good, Sally. Sally actually brought me to my very first Lib Dem conference back in 2017, so it's really nice to be able to speak after you, and that was very eloquent. I can really feel the emotion in the room when we're talking about this subject, the policy of sending refugees to Rwanda and the way the government treats refugees and asylum seekers in general. And certainly in Winchester, it is a cause that is close to people's hearts. And one of our fantastic councillors, John Tippett-Cooper, is working very hard to secure Winchester's status as a city of sanctuary for refugees, and we're making good progress on that. But of all the cruel and unworkable policies the government has come out with in the last 14 years, this is possibly and arguably the worst of them, because the government knows that this policy won't even stop small boat crossings, and they know that the only way to stop small boat crossings is actually to open up safe and legal routes so people do not need to risk their lives, having often fled for their lives from countries. So far, this government has sent more Home Secretaries to Rwanda than they have refugees or asylum seekers. It's cost us as taxpayers £500 million, and it has also damaged our international reputation on the world stage. And after 14 years of incompetent and broken promises, and the only thing that the Tories have left to fall back on now is stoking culture wars against this vulnerable group of people. Our record NHS times were not caused by refugees and asylum seekers. Like our schools that are at risk of collapse were not caused by refugees or asylum seekers. And our economy wasn't crashed by refugees or asylum seekers. So they are trying to blame all their failings as a government on this vulnerable group of people. But the truth is, refugees and asylum seekers could be actively contributing to our workforce and our economy and helping to solve some of these problems. So, Conference, I urge you, please support this motion so that refugees and asylum seekers in the UK can be treated with respect and dignity, and then go back to your constituencies and fight harder than ever to get rid of this pathetic government.
Thank you very much, Danny. We're now moving to the vote on motion F16B, Beyond Rwanda, a fairer way forward on asylum. You'll see the text of the motion on pages 5 and 6 of Conference Daily. Can I now see all those voting in favour of motion F16B? Thank you very much. And now can I see all those voting against the motion? Can't see anyone, and that's the same online as well. So that motion is very clearly carried. Thank you very much, Conference. Thank you for all the speakers. Sorry for those of you that I didn't have time to call. Thank you to my aides, Lucas North and Tom Campion. I now hand over to John Ball for the report session.
Good morning, Conference. If you can all settle down, please, so we can get on with the next session, which is a party accountability session where we'll hear from the chairs of 5 party bodies who will introduce their reports and answer questions from members. The reports are in a separate Reports to Conference booklet, which is available on paper or in the Conference Papers section of the app. The questions start on page 15 of Conference Extra or page 7 of today's Conference Daily. We'll take the votes on all the reports together at the end of the session. So all this information is also available in the Conference app and online via the agenda link on the Conference Live page. So will questioners please stand by if they wish, stand by the intervention mic if they wish to ask brief supplementary questions. And I now call Mark Pack, the President of the Liberal Democrats, to move the report of the Federal Board.
Thank you, John. And I'd just like to start with some more general thanks as well, because for all the volunteers in our party who in whatever way give up time to serve on party committees, whether it's the board or other committees in our party, your willingness to give up your time to those tasks is absolutely essential to making sure that our internal democracy functions and that we act internally in the liberal and democratic way that we want the country to be run as well. And particular thanks to my 3 vice chairs on the board, Jenny, Jeremy and Amna, who give up huge amounts of time giving me wise and sensible advice. Any mistakes the board makes definitely are my fault. Any successes of the board are almost certainly due to their wise and sensible advice and that of our other colleagues on the board. Thank you as well to our staff team who support the work of the board and the party more generally so effectively, led so ably by our Chief Executive, Mike Dixon, and a particular thanks to Carl Cashman, because Carl is the member of staff who staffs our board meetings and makes sure we can do our work efficiently. The real challenge for the board at this part of the Westminster electoral cycle, in many ways, is one of balance, getting the balance right between the absolute essential importance of maximising the number of MPs we get at the general election, whenever it comes, but also remembering getting the balance right because of those important local elections coming up this May, and indeed next May. We have a general election right near the end of this Parliament. The next local elections will be coming round very, very quickly after that. Getting the balance right between the short-term necessity of focusing in on the next imminent polling day and the longer-term importance of continuing to work on themes such as improving our use of data and technology and improving our record on diversity and inclusion. And getting the balance right between not just winning in our target seats at the general election, but making sure we make full use of the opportunity, the level of interest that we get in an election to build the strength of our party across a much broader front as well. Now, the report that you've got in the report booklet sets out some of the details of how we're tackling that challenge, and my monthly reports up on the party website fill in more details in between conferences. One of the most important things for us to get right this year is ending in a financially sustainable way, because one of the big successes of this Parliament was our ability to invest in a much larger grassroots campaign support team right from the beginning of the Parliament, avoiding the previous boom and busts of us ramping up staff numbers in advance of a general election, but then having to massively downsize our team straight after the election. And we've seen the benefits of being able to invest early in this Parliament, both for that staff team's development and experience, but for all of our fighting of campaigns. There are so many important campaigns coming up in the first half of the next Parliament, local elections, Scottish and Welsh elections in particular. So we need to be able to have a good, strong team in place to support all of us right from the beginning. Most recently, one of the other challenges we have faced is sadly the rise in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, particularly in the last few months. And I know that's been sadly a particular challenge in this party as well, with disciplinary action having to be taken through our independent complaints process against several party members. But I would therefore particularly like to thank all the staff and volunteers who helped run that process. And I think we should take some reassurance from its rigorous independence means that even some people holding quite senior roles in the party have had sanctions upheld against them, which shows that it is a truly independent process under which everyone, whatever role or post they hold in the party, however important they might think they are, everyone is treated equally. Now, given the importance of that process, the board in its report is reporting a set of changes to the complaints process to you. There are very detailed explanations in the webpage, as mentioned in the board report, that go through line by line explaining each of those changes. But in summary, they're all about making the system clearer, simpler, more robust and quicker, based on detailed feedback from participants in the system, from those who run it, from those who have been through it. Finally, one thing I should say is this question about what do we do around our autumn conference, because quite simply, if, let's say, after the summer recess, Rishi Sunak comes back and calls a general election in early September, it's quite possible that our conference would happen on the days in which nominations close in that general election. So hopefully many of you will have seen the email from myself and Nick as chair of conference committee setting out some of the options that we're looking at. And I know there are some questions on that, so I'll talk more about that in the questions. I'd just like to conclude once again with my thanks to everyone who helps and supports the board in our work, and I hope that in return you feel that our work helps make it easier for you to be more successful in the party. And with that, I'd like to move the report and report to you those changes to the complaints process.
Thank you, Mark. So now, please, can you answer the first question, which you did allude to? It's question 1 from John Grout, relating to conference cancellations.
Yeah, so John asks in part about what's happened with cancelled conferences. We've had to cancel 2 in the last few years, one in spring 2020 due to the outbreak of COVID, and one in the autumn of 2022 due to the Queen's death. John asked for what the financial impact of those was. If you compare what the outturn was for each of those events compared to what we were budgeting, the Spring Conference 2020 turned out £88,000 worse, and the Autumn 2022 conference turned out £207,000 worse. That £207,000 figure significantly reduced to the very kind decision by many of you to turn your registration fees into donations, and many thanks for that. I should perhaps say that if you look at the costings, if we had to cancel our conference this autumn at the last moment, the net cost to us would be significantly higher than that autumn 2022 figure for a variety of reasons, one of which is that our staff usually very kindly work well beyond their contracted hours in the run-up to and during a conference, and therefore take time off in lieu afterwards. Absolutely right and proper. However, if we're then straight into a general election, it just will not be possible for that to happen, and we would need to essentially buy out that time off in lieu from staff. So that would significantly potentially add to the cost. You then go on, John, to ask about why should any party member ever attend conference again? Well, I really hope members will. I came to my first conference in spring 1992, and I've been to every federal conference that we've held since. So when I say I'm committed to conference, I quite literally have put my money where my mouth is over many years, and I don't want to think about how much money that adds up to over those years. But as I said earlier, it's possible that closer nominations might be in the middle of when our autumn conference is scheduled to happen. So I think it is the right and responsible thing to do, to be looking at contingencies and to make sure that, if any of you are thinking about, booking accommodation now for the autumn, because it's, a sensible thing to do to get lower prices, to be aware, to double check, cancellation terms and conditions. I think in spring 2020, lots of us had just never thought that might be something to have to worry about checking. And so I hope by flagging it up early, we're being responsible and fair to people.
Thank you, Mark. John, did you want to ask a supplementary? Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mark. I note that as well as the 2 that were cancelled, there were also some conferences during COVID which were made remote at the last minute, and there would have been a financial impact from that decision as well. So I'd be interested if you could elaborate on that. And the reason I ask about members ever attending again is I've noticed that in the consultation from you and Nick, you say that you're seeking a wide variety of views from across the party. And a lot of the members I've spoken to, particularly as chair of Reading, a lot of my members have said that they don't know if they will come to conference because there's so many that have been cancelled or made online at the last minute that they no longer have confidence in it. And it struck me that in the prefatory notes to that consultation, a lot of the arguments put forward could be used as arguments to never have an in-person conference again. So I'd be interested if you could elaborate on that.
So in answer to the first part of your supplementary question, John, I don't have those figures with me, but I'm very happy if you wish to maybe email me afterwards. I can include an answer to that in my written answers that get published on our website afterwards. In answer to your second part, the possibility that close of nominations in a general election might happen during our conference is unprecedented. So this is absolutely because of these really exceptional circumstances. We've never had, in 2019, the general election was actually a couple of months after our conference, and when we were running our conference, we didn't know there was a general election around the corner. We've never had that situation where we have to think, I might be having, I'm from an election agent, I might be having to submit my nomination papers on the day of, perhaps it would be the board report at conference. So, that is an unprecedented situation. I think it is reasonable, therefore, to say maybe we will have to do something different. I don't know what the results of the consultation will be. I know lots of people are bombarding me with lots of suggestions, so I genuinely don't know what the decision the board will take on this will be. But I think it is responsible to be thinking these exceptional circumstances, do we go ahead as normal or do we go for a slightly different course of action?
Thank you. So unfortunately, we won't have time for the other questions, but they will receive written responses. I have received a request to reject the changes to the complaints process that are being reported to conference as part of the Federal Board report. Will Mark Pack stand by to respond? And I now call Mark Johnston from Reigate to move this rejection.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Conference. I would have preferred to refer back this part of the report, but the standing orders are such that that's not possible. So instead, I'm now asking you to reject this part of the report. I'll explain why in the next minute or so. Of course, we need a fair and effective disciplinary scheme within the party. The MacDonald reforms of 6 years ago are and continue to be a lot better than what went before. However, this proposal is not that fair and effective scheme. In particular, the dramatic expansion of scope gives a new power to party bodies to complain against individuals, but it does not give the equivalent power to individuals to complain against party bodies. That, to me at least, is asymmetric. It's fundamentally unfair, and I don't think we should proceed on this basis. There are also other legal defects elsewhere in the disciplinary code that could be fixed if we do, in effect, send it back and have a further review. We got where we are today because at the moment the process is controlled by a very small number of people, and they've made these changes they've made these major changes without consulting members, which is actually a requirement of the procedure itself when there are major changes. So to sum up, conference, we need to put this right. Party standards needs genuine members' consent. Let's be sure we get onto it without delay. I know it's a busy year for obvious other reasons. Let's do what it says on the tin. Let's make sure we have a fair deal on party standards for all participants. Please vote this down. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mark. I now call Mark Pack to respond to this request on behalf of the Federal Board.
Thank you, John. Given what Mark said, it's worth maybe saying a little bit about the process by which these changes were drawn up. They first started being drafted 4 months ago before conference. They involved party staff who help administer the system. They involved our senior adjudicators, who are the volunteers who oversee the system. They involved the disciplinary subgroup of the board who provide advice and recommendations on how the system should be run. They were considered in detail by the Federal Board, and indeed the Federal Council, on which Mark sits, had the opportunity to call these in for detailed discussion, but the majority of Federal Council members didn't think that was necessary, in part, I'm sure, due to the detail and thoroughness of the process, including lawyers at multiple stages. And indeed, you can judge the level of serious, detailed work that has taken place by the fact that the document on the website explaining these changes, that goes through them line by line, is 27,655 words long, if my memory serves me correct. That is not, a rushed job by any means. And on Mark's specific point about party bodies, the complaints process is about individuals. If you have a complaint about a body not doing its job correctly in the party, there are other processes you can follow. The reason for making the change that is being proposed in this version of the process is at the moment, if let's say there's a committee and there's a committee meeting and somebody really misbehaves in that meeting, and then everyone else thinks, well, I guess we need to put in a complaint, which one of us should do it, etc. There's all of this little bit of smoke and mirrors. Are you really doing it on behalf of the whole committee? Are you doing it as an individual? Should multiple individuals do it, etc.? This will make that system much clearer, simpler, and transparent. And I would also say that, if this was something that had just, been written by me on the back of an envelope last night, absolutely, the fact that we might not have another conference before a general election wouldn't be an argument to sort of weigh heavily on your minds. But I think given that this is based on a 4-month process involving multiple parts of the party, staff and volunteers, participants and observers, I think it's particularly important that I hope you will support implementing these changes today, because it may be that we don't have another chance to change the system before a general election. Who knows? We might have June, July, early September general election. But above all, I just would like to emphasise one final point, which is that there are, legitimate differences of view over exactly where we should draw the line, exactly how our process should work. But all of the different viewpoints, from the disciplinary subgroup, the Federal Board, the Federal Council with its opportunity to call things in, the people who run our senior adjudicator team, the party staff who help administer it. This wording in front of you is the outcome of all of that process. It's been a long, careful, considered process, and therefore I hope you will support those changes today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So we now move to a single vote online and in the hall on this proposal to reject the changes to the complaints procedure. Can I see all those who wish to reject the changes to the complaints procedure? Thank you. And can I see all those who wish to retain the changes to the complaints procedure? Thank you. I'm going to look at the online votes. So those changes are clearly retained. Thank you. I'll take the reports. I'll take the votes on the reports as a whole together at the end of the session, the accountability session. So we now move to the report of the Campaign for Gender Balance. I call Councillor Julia Cambridge, Chair of the Campaign for Gender Balance, to move her report.
Good morning, Conference. I am delivering this report on behalf of the 3 Campaign for Gender Balance officers, which is our Chair, Candy Piercy, Vicky Slade and myself. So, the CGB team has had a very busy 6 months. We ran a well-received set of 12 training sessions at Federal Conference in Bournemouth in September. This put us in contact with a new set of excellent aspiring women candidates. They then came to CGB for help to prepare them for the candidate approval process. After approval, many of these women were successful in the selections for the Westminster seats of their choice. Nearly all seats have now been selected for the forthcoming general election. CGB are continuing, though, to support women preparing for approval, ready for the future selections. We've been running training sessions, I think successfully, here at York today, at the Spring Conference, and indeed yesterday. We're setting up online training for women who are now selected and will be standing for the very first time as parliamentary candidates. We're looking forward to the general election, where we hope to see a significant number of women trained by CGB elected to Westminster. This year, CGB would like to thank and pay tribute to Caroline Pidgeon AM as she steps down in May from her GLA role for all her support, time and expertise given to CGB, particularly for our inspiration evenings. She played a pivotal role in those evenings. We know that she has many years to come, and we hope we can continue to draw on her expertise and encouragement to women at the start of their journeys. So, thank you, Caroline. And finally, for all the Liberal Democrat women around the country standing as council candidates this May, and in London for the London Assembly elections, thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Julia. So there was a single question submitted to this report from Alison Jenner relating to sex discrimination. So would you like to answer that, please?
Okay, I don't know if you're in the auditorium, Alison. Thank you for your question. We always welcome questions to do with our report and to do with CGB. I would say, though, sad news for you, this is not our remit. So what I would advise is that you talk to organisations like Liberal Democrat Women, excellent organisations. They've just elected a new chair and a fantastic new executive. And also, I would say, ALDC.
Thank you. Alison, would you like to ask a supplementary?
Would you say that this sort of behaviour against women councillors and candidates would be prima facie a breach of the Code of Conduct? Okay.
Thanks, Alison. I didn't hear the last part of your comment. Would it be
a breach prima facie of the Members' Code of Conduct to take action discriminating against women candidates and members?
Okay, thanks so much for that question. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to say that's not a question for CGB, but thank you for raising it.
Okay, thank you, Julia. We will have the votes on all of these reports at the end of the session. So, as I said, that was the only question submitted for that one. So we now move on to the... We now move on to the Federal Communications and Elections Committee report, which will be moved by Baroness Kath Pinnock. So, thank you.
Morning, everybody. The detailed report is in the papers for the conference, and I just want to pick out some highlights. First of all, I do want to thank the very talented team that we have organising our general election and other election campaigns. Dave McCobb, Campaigns Director, Ollie Grenda as Communications Director, and all members of the FCEC who put in so much time and give us so much of their experience and knowledge to help us make the best possible decisions. Obviously, the key issue that FCEC discusses is the general election preparation and planning and review of the top tier seats for the general election, to see just checking their achievements and how we can do even more. But one of the other themes that FCEC was determined to consider was the importance of developing a strategy of encouraging campaigning excellence everywhere. And we have agreed a strategy to do so. The third thing, just to emphasise, is that we don't just think about parliamentary elections. We also consider local elections, and last year spent a considerable amount of time trying to encourage more candidates to stand in more of our local elections, and we were successful in doing that, but there's more to do. We need candidates to stand everywhere to give every voter an opportunity to vote Liberal Democrat. And we work very closely with ALDC on this theme of our committee considerations. Finally, we also think about our candidate selection, not the selection process so much as just checking that candidates are being selected and that where are the gaps and so on. And also, you will know that the Electoral Commission has decided that every agent in a general election campaign for the Liberal Democrats has to go through some training. So I've got a prop here, because I like props. So that's the number of places that Kerry Buist and the team have held, where they have held training for the general election. And as you can see, it's a lot of places. So there's still, again, more to do. So if you'd like to be a general election agent, let Kerry Buist and the team know. And they will, I'm sure, make sure that you have the training. And with that, over to the questions.
Thank you, Kath. So yeah, would you like to answer question 1, which is a composite of questions by John Grout and Adam Robertson, and it relates to support for various categories of seats?
Yes, dear. So the first question is about support for the various tiers of seats that we have in the party. So you will know that we have 4 tiers: advanced, moving forward, and then development and startup. And FCEC is very, very keen that we try and support all of those seats in any way we can, but bearing in mind that our ambition is to elect people, and that means that we focus the scarce resources of the party onto those areas where we think we can be successful. But nobody is left out of the sort of support that we can provide. So you've heard that I've said that tiers 3 and 4, the startup and development seats, and some of the moving forward seats, there's a strategy of what to do, how to plan. There was, in fact, a training session yesterday for those who were in those seats, so they could see what their aims should be. But as far as possible, the dedicated resources of the party, which are very limited, unless you know of a billionaire with a deep pocket, we will have to focus those resources on the key seats and moving forward plus seats.
Thank you very much, Kath. Would John like to ask a supplementary? Yes, if you'd like to come down to the intervention mic. Great.
Thanks very much, Kath. I'm conscious that a lot of focus, certainly in the region I'm part of, has been on the advanced seats quite rightly, and there's been some direct support given to start-up and development seats, but it feels like the moving forward seats have slightly slipped through the crack. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit more on how we can help the moving forward seats become the target seats next time round.
Okay, now that's a really good question, because what we have to do is try and move everybody up the tier so, we can elect even more Lib Dem MPs. So the moving forward seats are those seats where they've probably been in second place and have a good structure in place and enough activists to do a decent campaign. And some of them were doing so well that we had to create a bit of a differentiation in that group, and they were called Moving Forward Plus. And although the party, unfortunately, doesn't have enough resources to dedicate to supporting those Moving Forward Plus seats, as we would hope, nevertheless, they are given encouragement and the experience of key campaigners to help lift them up to become target seats. And the other Moving Forward seats get the support that the rest of the country gets as an encouragement, sharing on the campaign hub. If you're not on the campaign hub, get there. There's a huge amount of resource information there to help seats everywhere. Hope that answers.
Thank you, Kath. So, as it was a composite question, if Adam Robertson is here and wants to ask a supplementary, he can, but I'm not seeing him by the mic. So, unfortunately, we won't have time to answer the other questions to your report.
What a shame.
But I'm sure you'll provide written responses. And we'll take the votes on all the reports at the end of the session, as I mentioned. So now we move to, thank you, Kath. Now we move to F20, the Federal International Relations Committee, which will be moved by David Chalmers, who is the chair of the committee. Thank you.
Good morning, Conference. I'd like to move the report for the Federal International Relations Committee, of which I'm chair. Over the last, certainly at the moment, over the last 6 months, developing relations with our sister parties has been really important, and I led the delegation to the council meeting of ALDE in Bucharest back in October. As we all know, we are now a non-EU party, and it's a really, sadly, and for us, it's actually finding a role and making sure that we maintain our influence within and amongst our sister parties across Europe. Going forward, for us, any sort of development or future development of a relationship with the EU is going to mean that we need our sister parties on side. And this has been one of the key areas that we're working on and which we're continuing to work on. Next week, I'm going to the ALDE Congress in Brussels, which will be confirming the manifesto for our sister parties going into the European elections. Point out to you, there was no mention of the UK in that manifesto. We have managed to secure mentions to us, and hopefully they'll be voted on, talking about developing the EU developing a closer relationship with the UK and also closer cooperation on security and foreign policy. It's not going to be an easy task going forward, but we need to make sure that they're on side. At the Bucharest Council, we did very much the same, the message that Layla has been doing so fantastically here in the UK, but we actually took a motion which brought on side unanimously all our sister parties from across Europe on this really important issue. And it was the careful sort of use of language which enabled us to do so. Moving forward, we will continue to do so. As I say, it's very important that we develop those relationships. You heard this morning in one of the debates around Russia and what's happening in Russia and Ukraine. Again, we have sister parties in the Ukraine and Russia that we're in daily sort of contact with, which sets us and gives us a really unique position amongst the parties here in the UK. I myself have been meeting with Russian opposition parties. I met with Volkov, who was so sadly attacked last week. He was the chief of staff of Navalny. And we are, as you saw in the motion this morning, that we are giving support to those people within Russia and outside Russia, and also to the Ukrainians. We nominated Karamurza for the Liberal International Prize for Freedom, and he was awarded that at a ceremony in Parliament given to his wife back in the end of last year. It's really important for us as a party to be making these significant sort of positions. I'd just like to also say that as you'll read in the report, we've done some restructuring within our subcommittees. So we finished a lot of the work we've done on China, which was incorporated into the security motion, which was voted on yesterday and passed. We've now developed a subcommittee which will be looking at authoritarian regimes in general, one that is looking more at the Commonwealth, Global South, and how to develop partnerships in those worlds and give support to our parliamentarians. Our communications subcommittee has produced a strategy on how we can engage more with members and members engage with us on international issues and be able to explain to you what we are doing as a party inside and outside of Parliament. And I hope to see more of that through next year. Liberal International, we are looking for a new representative to join me to meetings of Liberal International, and there will be an election for all members of the party later next month. So that's what I've said. I would also just like to thank all the members of my committee who have managed to put the things together that we have achieved what we've done. They're all volunteers. We as a committee, I must point this out, we only have one member of staff 1 day a week. The rest of our work on the international side is all done by volunteers. And I would just really, really like to thank all of those people who are involved in the works of the committee, the subcommittees, and the visits that we do, our delegations. Without them, this could not continue, that we do so. We were hoping that to be able to develop more of that through the coming year. So really, that's what I would like to say. I'd just like to, and there was a question I saw from one of the other committees about how we support LGBT candidates. I'd just like to point out that the UK has been one of the leading members within ALDI to set up the Rainbow Platform. I'm a Rainbow Ambassador, and this is absolutely the core of that, is actually to support LGBT plus candidates and members and how parties should actually be able to support them. So the UK is part of that, and we should be proud that we have actually set that up right across Europe, and it's being enacted now through our sister parties, so we can actually be a part of that and benefit from them. Thank you. I mean, it's just sometimes you're not aware of the things that we're doing, and I think that we need to maybe, let's say, we need a better communication strategy, but there is a lot of work that we're doing, a lot of good work within the committee and for the party. So thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, David. There were no questions submitted to that report, so we move straight on to F21, which is the Federal Council report, which will be moved by Councillor Prue Bray, who is one of the Vice Chairs of the Federal Council.
Hello, good morning, Conference. In Anthony's absence, I'm presenting this report. I did just want to briefly give you an update on what's happened since the report was submitted, because there's quite a long lead-in time for reports to be published for Conference. So we had a meeting on the 6th of March, and that meeting looked at the general election strategy. We had a very good presentation from Neil Fawcett and a good discussion. We also, and here, full disclosure, I am a vice chair of the disciplinary subgroup, and there are several other members of the disciplinary subgroup on Federal Council, and we did a presentation about the disciplinary system and the changes to it, which Mark, I think, has alluded to earlier on, has just been, the new rules have just been passed. Thank you for that. But we also had our first call-in of a federal board decision. A federal council operates somewhat like an overview and scrutiny committee in a council, for those of you who know how councils work. And we had not previously called in a federal board decision, but the one we called in was the one that's about considering what should happen to autumn conference this year in the light of the general election. Now, obviously, that final decision hasn't been made. We had a very good discussion, and we're very grateful to the members of the federal board who came to discuss it with us. And as a result of it, we have made 5 recommendations to the federal board for when they come to make the decision. So we think they should widen the options that that are being looked at, including the online offering. That in the papers for their next discussion, they should have clear and detailed information about the risks, including their probability, and costs and compliance issues. That they should explore the mitigation of the loss of training opportunities by utilising events put on by other parts of the party. That they should consult with AOs, and I believe that has started to happen. And if you're an AO, please come and tell me afterwards if you haven't been consulted. And they should also include in the papers a clear statement of the outcome of the consultation with members, which covers the replies to the questions in that survey, but also provides a response to any issues raised. And I think that is a critical friend response to the federal board. I don't believe there are any questions, so I think I've got off quite lightly. But if you haven't yet replied to that survey about autumn conference, I would urge you to do so, because that is one way, as members, you can get your voice heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prue. So as Prue mentioned, there were no questions to that report. So we now move to a series of 5 votes, which you can take part in here in the hall or online. So the votes are just about being opened online now. So first we'll take the vote on the Federal Board report. So can I see all those in favour of approving the report? Thank you. And can I see all those against approving the report? I see 1 or 2. Thank you. Sorry, we'll have to leave a little bit of time for the online votes to catch up. So including votes online as well, that is very overwhelmingly approved. Next, can I see all those in favour of approving the report of the Campaign for Gender Balance? Thank you. And those who wish to reject it? Thank you. Yes, so that is very clearly approved. Now can I see all those in favour of approving the report of the Federal Communications and Elections Committee? Thank you. And those against? See 1 against. So that is very clearly approved. And can I see all those in favour of approving the report of the Federal International Relations Committee? Thank you. And those against? Thank you. So that's very clearly approved. So finally, can I see all those in favour of approving the report of Federal Council? Thank you. And those against? Great, thank you. That did seem to be NEMCON, both here and in the hall. So thank you to the movers of the reports and to the questioners. Apologies to the many questioners we didn't have time to get to. I'd like to thank my aide here, Eleanor Kelly, and my aide in the hall, Belinda Brooks-Gordon. I now hand over to Simon McGrath, who will chair the next session.
Good morning, Conference. If those of you that are leaving could leave quietly, please. Good morning, Conference. I'd now like to introduce our next speaker, who in fact needs very little introduction to this conference. He's the MP for Orkney and Shetland. He's our former Chief Whip, former Secretary of State for Scotland. He's currently our spokesman on Home Affairs, on Northern Ireland and on Justice. And he's our longest serving MP, Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Simon. An introduction with so many formers in it. Well, good morning, Conference. It's good to be back here in York, or as I have heard some of you call it in the last couple of days, the North. Really? North, South, these are all relative terms, something that even I and a Southerner like Jamie Stone can agree on. I'm actually particularly fond of coming to York. Like Orkney and Shetland, this is a place that embraces its Viking heritage, albeit in the most genteel way imaginable. I don't know if there are many vegetarian Vikings. The sagas are silent on the subject of plant-based diets, but I'm pretty sure that if there were, this is where they landed. Now, Viking invasion. There was a moment in our nation's history where it would have been quite legitimate for people like Suella Braverman to get wound up by the threat posed by people coming here in small boats. Talking about Suella, did you see her saying that apparently the country is now being run by Islamic fundamentalists? Liz Truss, on the other hand, says that the country is being run by trans activists. Now, I'm no expert, but I suspect they can't both be right. What I think is remarkable, however, is that it seems neither of them thinks that Rishi Sunak is actually running the country. So, in that much at least, they could both be correct. We may not have a date for the election. There has not yet been a single vote cast, but already the Conservatives are acting more like an opposition than a government. They have simply lost interest in running the country. One of the fundamental truths of politics is that governments and babies' nappies need to be changed regularly, and for much the same reason. Never was that as true as it is today with this Conservative government. In 2019, with Jeremy Corbyn as the alternative, many people were prepared to hold their noses and to vote Conservative. 5 years on, they can hold their noses as tightly as they want, but there is no getting away from the stench of cronyism and corruption from this government. So let us be quite clear. When that election comes, a vote for the Liberal Democrats will be a vote to rid our country of their corrupt and corrupting influence. In the next Parliament, as in this one, Liberal Democrats will have no truck with the demonisation of desperate people fleeing persecution, war, or starvation. Be equally, though, in no doubt, we shall break the people smugglers' business model. We won't do it by cooking up pointless schemes, eye-watering expense, and planes to Rwanda. We will do it as we have already done it for people coming from Ukraine or from Hong Kong, by giving them safe and legal routes to get here. And you know, we shall do it because that's still the sort of country we are. We're still a country that believes in obeying the law at home and abroad. We're still a country that will live up to its obligations. We're still a country that is at its strongest when we bring people together and not when we divide them. If the Conservative government cannot perform these most basic of functions, then they do not speak for this United Kingdom and they have to go. But come that election, not being the Conservatives can only be our starting point. People will want to hear more than that. They will want to hear that this party knows not just what it is against, but what it is for. And that is what we must now tell them. As Liberals, our starting point is always the freedom of the individual, the right that we all have to do as we want, as long as it does no harm to others. We are Liberals, not libertarians. We understand also that for people to have meaningful freedom, we pool our individual freedoms to make a thing called community. And then we build upwards to nation states that we then expect to work with other nation states. That's why ours truly is a party of law and order. Because we understand that we cannot enjoy our freedom if we're not safe to leave our own front door. And conference, that is the reality of how so many of our fellow citizens feel today. 3 out of 4 cases of burglary and car theft are still going unsolved. Victims of crime have to wait for hours when they report it, if anyone actually shows up at all. Why? Well, look at the numbers of police officers focused on frontline policing. Just 12% of officers in England and Wales are assigned to neighbourhood policing teams. The Tories have taken over 4,500 police community support officers off the streets since 2015. And now day-to-day Home Office spending is expected to be cut by nearly 1/5 in real terms over the coming financial year. This government is failing on the basics of keeping our communities safe. To stop and to solve crime, we need police on the front line, out and about in their communities where the community can see them and then feel safe. But now, not content with just trashing the basics and ignoring the people's priorities, they're off again, tilting at windmills. It was buried away in the footnotes to last week's budget, but they have just set aside almost £250 million to fund pilot schemes for live facial recognition technology and more use of drones. It kind of sums up the double standards of this government pretty well. The Foreign Office talks a good game criticising the Chinese government for their oppression of the Uyghur population in Xinjiang province. But at the same time, the Home Office is opening the door to companies like Hikvision, whose technology made it possible. The use of live facial recognition technology has never been authorised by Parliament to be used on our citizens in this way. This stands in fundamental contradiction of the most basic British principle of policing by consent. And that's why I tell you today, any influence that this party has on the next government will be used to put every penny of that £250 million back into frontline community policing. Under this increasingly authoritarian Conservative government, we risk sleepwalking into a surveillance state. We know how it happens. The starting point is always, if you've got nothing to hide, then you've got nothing to fear. Well, actually, lots of people have plenty of things to hide. And more than that, they're quite entitled to hide them. It's called privacy. So, information about your health, your finances, your family, your business, all sorts of things that are really no one's business but your own. And then they'll tell us, don't worry, your data will be held by the government. Trust me, we're the government. Well, try telling that to the 9,500 officers and civilian staff of the Police Service of Northern Ireland, whose names, workplace location and unit were published on the PSNI own website. Yeah, it was an accident, but it was an accident that was able to happen because the force had no strategy for keeping that data secure. And that conference was no accident. That was the product of a political system and government that allows the people at the centre and at the top to think that they should be able to control the rest of us. In this party, we know that it is our right and indeed our duty to control them. Only the Liberal Democrats understand the importance of this. Who here thinks that Labour can be trusted to protect our freedoms? I'll tell you now, I don't. Labour has an authoritarian streak in it a mile wide. Every time when they want to out-Tory the Tories, then acting tough on civil liberties is their go-to option. That's why the last Labour government tried to introduce identity cards with a national identity register and a huge database of its use. That's why they tried to introduce 90-day detention without charge. That's why they allowed the growth of stop and search powers for the police that did so much to destroy that relationship of trust between the police and so many of the communities that they are charged with protecting. If the election puts the Labour Party into government, and if they want to pursue that agenda again in the future, then they should understand now that they will do it without the support of Liberal Democrat MPs. This party is not about splitting the difference between the Conservatives and the Labour Party. This party has its own distinctive roots and vision. We trust the people. They want to control them. We embrace diversity and difference. They see it as some sort of threat. Labour may offer a change of government, but we demand a change in the way in which we are governed. We demand a stronger, greener, fairer, and more united kingdom. Our vision is for a society where none shall be enslaved by poverty, ignorance, or conformity. That's what this party stands for. And the moment is fast approaching when we're going to have to get out and fight for it. Door by door, street by street, vote by vote. Fight for it like the very future of our country as a force for good in a dangerous and ever-changing world depends on it. Because, conference, be in no doubt, it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alistair. Conference, Alistair, that wasn't, as you know, Alistair's first speech, but it was his first standing ovation, so thank you very much. I'd like to thank my aide, Paul McGarry, and hand over to Jenny Rigg for the debate on local government finance. Thank you.
Good morning, conference. If I could ask those who are leaving the hall to do so quickly and quietly, and could people take their seats, because we are already running slightly late for this item, and I have had approximately 1 billion cards put in for it, and I would like to call as many speakers as possible. Right, good morning, conference and fellow survivors of the Glee Club, and welcome to F23, the funding crisis in local government, which you can find on page 9 of the agenda, and it's under conference documents if you're using the app. There is one moved and one drafting amendment, which you'll be able to find in your conference daily, and can I please remind all speakers to keep to time. And I ask Andy Sanger from Sheffield to stand by, and I call Joe Harris from the Cotswolds to propose the motion.
Conference. Can I first of all start by paying tribute to two giants of local government who announced their intention to stand down as the leaders of their respective councils this week. Ruth Dombey and Chris White have been giants of our party, have served for many, many years, so please show your appreciation for them very quickly. Now, both of them would say how good it is to see a local government debate get such a high-profile place in our agenda. It reflects the importance that our party places in local democracy. And for decades, our party has rightly held the mantle as the party of local government. Many national commentators talk about our strong local government base and our associated campaigning strength with being the foundations of our parliamentary campaigns. But we know it is much, much more than that. Liberals recognise the importance of localism, that decisions made closest to people, by local people, usually produce the best results for local communities. I say, conference, that now, more than ever, local government needs our party. We gather today to sound the alarm. We say clearly that local government as we know it is on the verge of collapse. The Local Government Association estimates that councils face a shortfall of £4 billion over the next 2 years in England alone. Around a quarter of councils could be issuing Section 114 notices. That's the grim euphemism for bankruptcy over the next year or so. A recent survey reveals that half of all councils fear they will have gone bankrupt over the lifetime of the next Parliament. Some councils have been able to keep the wolf from the door by getting permission to sell off the family silver. Leisure centres, historic buildings. One council even made themselves homeless by selling their council offices. And the money raised from this is being used to plug the gap in their budget. The only problem with this approach is that you can only spend that money once. And I can't emphasise the word crisis too strongly. Unless action is taken and quickly, we will see the destruction of meaningful local government in this country. The pressure on councils' budgets is still mounting. Inflation, high energy costs, increases to the national living wage. Of course it's important that people get a decent level of pay for the work they do, but councils need support in meeting this commitment. And as we know, the demand for services continues to rise. Rising demand for statutory services like social care and homelessness support have added to the cost pressures faced by councils. For example, Lib Dem Eastbourne is having to spend 49 pence in every pound of council tax they collect on temporary accommodation. The total cost to the council this year is £5 million. By 2024-25, cost and demand pressures will add 15 billion, almost 29%, to the cost of delivering council services since 2021. Councils constantly work to protect their budgets, working with and learning from each other to share and transform services, to ensure that they can deliver high-quality services for residents. But the truth is, there aren't any more easy savings to be found. Yet again, in the autumn statement and in this year's budget, the Chancellor failed to address the need for reforming our social care system, or indeed to address the wider funding crisis facing councils. In fact, rather than finding a solution to the social care crisis, he cut national insurance, which is meant to help pay for social care. The LGA has continually offered to host cross-party talks on the future of social care. The Liberal Democrats are making the argument for this service to be properly funded, taking the pressure off of other areas that local government needs to budget for. Conference, it's time that the other parties joined the Liberal Democrats around the table to make sure our elderly and vulnerable people get the funding that they need. Funding cuts over the last decade or so have had a dramatic effect on the services provided by councils. Many councils used to provide youth services, for example. In my own county of Gloucestershire, every youth club has now closed. And cuts like this have consequences. Once quaint market towns in our county now have urban street gangs made up of disaffected and ignored young people. Let's take what's happening in Birmingham. Because of Labour's failure to take tough decisions when they needed to, and a lack of funding certainty from the government, the council has declared bankruptcy. And as a result, hard-pressed residents in Birmingham have been slapped with a huge council tax increase, and cuts to services like hardship funding, parenting support, and mental health support are so bad they will impact children that aren't even born yet. And our infrastructure, look at our infrastructure, it's crumbling. Those of us who spend our time avoiding lunar-sized craters on country lanes and urban streets can attest to the literally broken holes in the fabric of our country, a direct result of the government's underfunding of local government. And let's look ahead to the general election and the potential for a change in government. We look for Labour's leadership on local government. And just last week, Rachel Reeves was on BBC television offering more of the same. And as for the Conservatives, they have ripped the heart out of local government, and it is up to us to hold them to account. They refuse even to listen to their own party's councillors about the dire state that the local councils are in. Conference, I was first elected in 2011 at the age of 18. I have to say it's rather worrying that at the age of 31, I now get referred to as a veteran councillor. But that optimistic 18-year-old didn't just become a councillor to provide the bare minimum of statutory services. I became a councillor to make my area better, to shape my place, not to manage its decline.
Councils are simply not being resourced to provide the services that residents are demanding. We want to innovate. We want to raise revenue to pay for local services, but the government even limit how we're able to do that. The system is broken, and we have to be the ones leading the charge to try and fix it. Over 3,000 hard-working Liberal Democrat councillors across the country need to know that the country nationally has their back. Doing the very best to defend the communities from the worst impacts of government cuts is what we do. They need to know that the sector and this party stands with them in their fight to stop the destruction of local government. And if enough of our MPs get elected, we'll use their political leverage in any new parliament to press for urgent finance reform. So I say to all of you this morning that we, the Liberal Democrats, are the party of local government. We, the Liberal Democrats, are the ones who have to act. Local government faces a bleak financial future if left to Labour and the Conservatives. Conference, I urge you to support this motion. Let's save local government. Thank you.
Would Helen Morgan MP please stand by? And I now call Andy Sanger from Sheffield, who wishes to propose Amendment 1.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Conference. I stand before you as a Liberal Democrat Sheffield City Councillor of 33 years standing. In Sheffield, we know a few things about local government financial challenges. I was elected in the year of the World Student Games, and this year we finished paying off the debt of the construction of the Don Valley Stadium, 10 years after it was demolished. In the 33 years I've been on the council, I've often listened to dire warnings from finance officers about the state of council finances and the tough choices that councillors need to take. But never in all those years have I read so many repeated warnings coming from councils the length and breadth of England. Councils of all shapes and sizes, from the smallest districts to the largest Mets, are heading towards financial ruin. Councils of all political persuasions, from single-party majorities to multi-party no-overall control, all face this extra tough time. Conference, our amendment builds on this excellent motion from ALDC. We want to acknowledge the additional demand-led pressure of homelessness and the need to fund temporary accommodation. The continued failure by central government year after year to support councils building affordable housing has led to this crisis. Not only is this awful for the individuals and families affected, but in many cases it's a rising cost to the council that takes them ever closer to the brink. Conference. England remains one of the most centralised democracies in Europe. Those of us in local government are fed up being told that the financial pressures on councils are all of our own making. The suggestion that we can avoid this challenge by a fire sale of assets to fund ongoing running costs would be laughable if it wasn't so ill thought out. But Conference, many of us in this hall this morning have a bit of a guilty thought at this spring conference, as we do at many other spring conferences. We know there are only 46 days to polling day. We know that Liberal Democrats make the best councillors, serving and empowering our diverse communities. Knowing that the best solutions to problems are found when we work alongside local people. Liberal Democrats, when you return from York, get back on those doorsteps, deliver those focus leaflets. Let's make the 2024 round of May elections as good for the Liberal Democrats as May 2023 was. I move the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. If I could ask Nathan Tarr from Newport to stand by, please. And I now call Helen Morgan, who is our MP for North Shropshire, and she wishes to speak in favour of the motion as a whole.
Thank you very much, Conference. You will have heard from my speech yesterday about the crisis in local government, and you've heard from Joe this morning all the statistics you need to know about just how severe that crisis is. Local governments faced a 25% cut in real terms funding since 2015. Partly the problem is caused by increasing demand as well. We've seen increasing demand for social care, increasing demand for special educational needs and disability support, and we've seen increasing demand for temporary accommodation. It's having a huge impact, and no council can run away from that increasing demand while their budget is being slashed. In Shropshire, the Conservative-run council spends 85% of its budget on social care. In Eastbourne, as we've heard, 49% spent on temporary accommodation. These are unimaginable burdens on the council, and they need funding properly. As an MP, you can see the impact of these pressures in your casework. My casework was described to me by my caseworker the other day as a complete bin fire. People who can't get support for their children with special educational needs and disabilities, people who can't access adequate social care, potholes, the number of emails about potholes I can't tell you. It seems trivial, but it's emblematic of how our fabric of local government is being allowed to crumble and decline. And it's not just those services as well. It's the lost future that matters. When we deprive local government of funding, we're losing investment in economic regeneration, in cultural enrichment. The Civic Centre in Whitchurch in my constituency has been found to have rack in its roof. It needs to be replaced, the roof, or the whole building rebuilt. But it's not going to be because Shropshire Council can't afford the interest on the borrowing. And that means that we lose not only an important civic centre with a library and a registry office and a performance space and an indoor market, it means we lose all those people coming into shop at the weekend. It will suck the life out of that high street. Pennies saved now are just going to cost more in the future. And that's why we need a proper long-term funding settlement with cross-party consensus so that it's sustainable into the future, so that we can stop lurching from crisis to crisis. Using your assets, selling your assets this year to plug a hole is a short-term fix. It will not solve the problem in local government. So I urge you to support this motion. We need to recognise the value of local government. We need to invest in our communities for the future, and we need a proper, sensible, long-term funding settlement so our councillors can go out and do the job that they are so brilliant at doing. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. If I could ask Andrew Hudson from Westmoreland, Furness and Eden to stand by, and I now call Nathan Tarr from Newport, who wishes to speak in favour of the motion as a whole.
Thank you, Jenny. Conference, this is my first time speaking at a federal conference. I've spoken plenty of times at Welsh conferences in the past, but this is the first time I've done it at a federal level. And I welcome that we are having this debate on local government funding. I spoke about a similar motion at Welsh conference 2 weeks ago, and I thought I would raise some points in this motion as well. I have seen the news of the increase in instances of Section 114 notices issued by councils in England because of financial difficulties and the need to get consent from Westminster to increase their council tax by more than the 5% limit imposed in legislation. Although it hasn't occurred yet, the risk that a Welsh council will do so is a real possibility. However, there is no limit to council tax rises in Wales, and there have been some very high council tax rises recently, with Pembrokeshire residents seeing a council tax increase of 12.5% from this year, although a rise of over 20% was proposed. In Newport, which has the best of a bad settlement from Welsh Government, council tax is going up 8.5%. And when that was mentioned at a public meeting I attended, it was not very well received. There is a knock-on effect on the lack of funding for local councils, and that is with our parish and community councils, with principal councils so desperate to save money, they have to end up putting community councils in a difficult position, which is either they take over services or they just disappear. And when a community or parish council takes on services from a local council, the money often doesn't follow, which leaves the community council liable for the bill, and that means often precept increases. I tell you now, it isn't fair on any area, whether there's a parish council, community council, or if there isn't. For those with them, they will find their total council tax bill is higher than those without, whilst those without are finding that they have fewer services and opportunities than those with them. My biggest concern is that many parish and community councils will end up being forced into taking on more in order to protect services, regardless of their ability, financial capability, resources, or impacts. And this is all down to local government being inadequately funded, be that in Wales, England, or Scotland. It is not fair, it is not right, and it's something that we, as Liberal Democrats, cannot and will not accept.
Thank you, Nathan. Can I ask Councillor Caroline Lever from North Devon to stand by, please? And I now call Andrew Hudson from Westmoreland, Furness and Eden, who I keep trying to not call Westmoreland and Lonsdale anymore.
Thank you, Chair. I'm in the awkward squad too. Now, these lines I'm against are a generalisation of a problem, but have a problem with the specifics. I used to believe them, now I'm not so sure. Recent experience with Westmoreland and Furness suggests otherwise. As far as my own town, Ulverston, is concerned, if we didn't know the meaning of the word Maniala before Westmoreland and Furness took over, we do now. A busy library has been closed due to electrical problems, which should have been addressed by Cumbria. They inherited them, but we have to make do with a pop-up service. Getting information about what the costs are, what the problems are, have had to be prized out of Westmoreland and Furness by freedom of information requests. As far as the Ulverston Town Council is concerned, they don't feel they're being engaged, sorry. And consultations seems to be more an excuse to kick it down the line. We'll have to consider the options. It's a statutory service, so by the time anything's done, there'll be no money left anyway. A leisure centre improvement that I put down when I stood for them a couple of years ago is going to take place. That's been delayed. A footbridge has been closed for nearly over a year. The council doesn't consider it a priority. In neighbouring Barrow, there's a garden waste collection scheme where there's charges inherited from Barrow. It still remains in force, even after a year. We've got to think about this, we've got to think about that. So again, that's gone down the road. And there's a branch library, if we're bad in Ulverston, there's a branch library at Roos that's also closed because of arson. No one knows quite what's happening there. That's even further down the line. Well, the rest of the parts of the amendment, it's not just dealing with the homeless. There's going to be cases about funding for care homes as well. The central part of the amendment, all I'll say is, what the government are wanting people to do is what they're accusing loony left councils doing to try and get that so-called loony left council, to try and get that rate capping. So I'm asking you to reject these lines because we're all acknowledge and all parties have got the share of the good, bad and the ugly. And who knows, maybe we'll get our library back.
Thank you, Andrew. Can I ask Michael Berwick-Gooding from Basingstoke and Dean to please stand by? And I now call Councillor Caroline Lever from North Devon. And this is Caroline's first time speaking at a federal conference as well.
Good morning, Conference. Conference, the Conservative government in Westminster is treating local government as a poor second cousin, and a second cousin it would really like to see removed. Local councils are an integral part of government, providing essential services to residents across the length and breadth of the country. But the Conservative government in Westminster undervalue local government, do not trust local government, and do not provide the funding local government needs to provide the essential services to our communities. The Local Government Association, which speaks from a cross-party perspective, notes that local government is looking at a £4 billion, yes, £4 billion funding gap for councils over the next 2 years. And let's think about what the impact this will have on our people, on our communities. It's an assault on the services that people see and use every day, that people need and care about, and which underpin our civil society. Councils are funded through a mix of council tax, business rates, income from services like parking and social housing rent, as well as money from government, known as Revenue Support Grant. The Conservative government has pursued a policy of cutting this revenue support grant year on year, relying on locally raised council tax to fill the gap, a regressive tax if ever there was one. The county council network say that the council tax now accounts for 2/3 of the average county council's funding. It's a regressive tax and councils should not need to rely on it. Conference, we all know that rising council tax does not solve the problems our residents experience. It does not protect day centres for the elderly or disabled, it does not protect libraries or schools, and it does not result in more bins being emptied or council houses being built. For those of us who knock on doors and talk with local residents, we will have all been faced with the accusation of council mismanagement as people pay more council tax but see worse services and crumbling roads. It's entirely understandable. There is no reason why normal, everyday people should know anything about local government finance, other than the bills that they receive. Funding has been cut by the government by nearly 1/3 between 2010 and 2021, according to the cross-party Public Accounts Committee at Westminster, leading to council income of 8.4 billion lower in real terms than it was a decade before. Conservative-led county council, where I'm the leader of the opposition, is no different than councils up and down the country, suffering from real terms cuts in money it's received from Westminster. The budget for next year has just been set. It balances, as it has to by law, but it's being paid for by raiding reserves and by cutting essential services. We're using reserves to pay for revenue costs for services that are being delivered every day. We will see fewer
Could you draw your remarks to a close,
okay.
please?
Sure. We're seeing fewer potholes mended, the end of mobile library service, and ever more constrained and adult social care. Conference, I will be supporting this motion, and I urge you to do the same. It's time for change. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Can I ask Jo Otten from Sheffield to stand by, please? And I now call Michael Berwick-Gooding from Basingstoke and Dean, who is against the motion as a whole, and in particular lines 47 to 49.
Good morning, Conference. It's good to see that a very small part of the amendment that I helped to write has been accepted as a drafting amendment. That's the addition of swimming pools. It has been suggested that this motion does not really provide a solution to the funding crisis in local government. Most of it sets out the problems with only 66 words regarding what we resolve to do. Lines 50 to 51 seem to say we should be supporting consensus policies rather than the excellent policies we agreed in Bournemouth set out in our policy paper, A More Caring Society. Lines 44 to 46 call for us to support the cross-party campaign by the LGA to make it local. Therefore, Conference Resolves 2, lines 47 to 49, is the only section which adds something to Liberal Democrat policies, but it is poorly worded. It talks of putting in place long-term funding, which is described as proper, but proper is not defined. It talks of closing the 4 billion funding gap as a matter of urgency. It could have been better worded. It could instead be calling for the closing of the 4 billion funding gap within the next 2 years, because earlier in the motion it points out that this funding gap is a 2-year funding gap, but we don't say that in the resolution section. And then, instead of calling for something which is proper, it could say that this long-term funding that we want should ensure that there are never any funding gaps in future years. I understand that someone may be moving a reference back for this motion later on. If this happens, please support the reference back so we can get this resolve section improved. Thank you, Conference.
Thank you, Michael. Can I ask Bill Revens from Bridgewater and West Somerset to stand by? And I now call Joe Otten, who is summating on behalf of Amendment 1.
Thank you, Conference. And thank you, Chair, for calling me, given I've not heard much opposition to Amendment 1, and many speakers have not had the opportunity. You already heard my colleague, Andrew Sanger, talk about the World Student Games fiasco in Sheffield, and that only recently paid off the debt long after the stadium was demolished. But this is just an example. We have other examples in Sheffield. You have examples across the country of Labour and Conservative and maybe even Green councils not listening to local people and wasting public money. And better use of public money, listening to our voters, listening to local needs, engagement with the public. It's not a solution to lack of funding, but it's a more vital than ever. It's a sacred duty that Liberal Democrat councillors deliver and other parties do not. In Sheffield lately, thank you. So in Sheffield, one of the recent issues we've had is the council built a container park at the top of Fargate. Now, container parks, food-based options, can be brilliant. There's one in York here, which we went to last year, and all took pictures of ourselves enjoying the food and sent them to our Labour colleagues. They can be brilliant. There's another good one in Gateshead. The one in Sheffield was a disaster. It never even fully opened. It spent all the money and it didn't work. And it was massively unpopular with the people. And the people said to us on the doorstep time and again, why do you let them do it? And the result of that is, of course, that now the Labour and then the Labour Green coalition no longer run Sheffield. It's now a three-party coalition. Since we came in, we've stopped hemorrhaging the reserves in order to balance the budget. We are now, I've got to say, in a position that is stronger than some councils. You know, the story is, isn't it, that if your two people are running away from a bear, you don't have to run faster than the bear, you have to run faster than the other person, don't you? And that's where Sheffield is now. 2 years ago, Sheffield was the person who would be caught by the bear, the council that would have gone bankrupt. We're in a better position than now because we have listened to local people, we have delivered what they want, and that is what Liberal Democrat councils up and down the country will do. Joe Harris, you're right, we are the party of local government, but Joe, you weren't partisan enough here because it's Liberal Democrats who'll deliver. It's not just a question of us standing up for local government in our national policy, as we do here, unless you pass our amendment. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So I now call Bill Revens from Bridgewater and West Somerset, who is summating the motion as a whole.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Conference. I am the leader of Somerset Council. It has been 130 days since we declared a financial emergency because we were running close to a Section 114 notice. Declaring that financial emergency was a warning to our residents of the difficult choices that we would have to make in Somerset, but it was also a warning of what would be happening to local government across the country. So how do Liberal Democrats tackle a financial emergency? We are transparent. We will be honest. We will tell the truth to our residents. We will take care of those most in need in our communities. And we will make the most of every opportunity there is. But we have to make some tough and unpleasant decisions. We have had to put forward a budget that is legal. It is balanced only because it uses reserves and depends on asset sales. And we have worked in partnership with our city, town and parish councils and with the police and with the health service in order to maintain whatever services we can. This is not a situation of our choosing. This is not a situation of our making, but it's our responsibility to fix it on behalf of our residents. We will not let the government-appointed commissioners, highly paid officials, come into Somerset and do the job we were elected to do on behalf of our residents. So if this is not a situation of our making, where does it come from? So our predecessors, the Conservatives that ran Somerset County Council, they froze council tax for 5 years, and the budget gap is roughly equivalent, strangely enough, to the amount that would have brought in from that council tax freeze. People have talked about selling off the family silver. The family silver was already sold off. We're rummaging in the attics for the cracked crockery to stick on a car boot sale in Somerset. But this is a national problem, and it needs a national solution. Local government, the model of local government funding, the model of how we deliver social care in this country is fundamentally broken. You cannot fund adults and children's social care, demand-led services, predominantly out of a tax on 1991 property values. No one would design that system. No one. No one. This has been one of those debates in which, largely, we've all been agreeing with each other. Joe, Andy, Helen, Nathan, Andrew, Caroline, and Joe, all making very similar points. We have a legacy of local government experience that we should be rightly proud of. The Liberal Democrats are undoubtedly a party of local government. However, the future that we see before us, the road that we are on, is towards the oblivion of local government. That road is peppered with potholes. This party needs to stop pointing at the potholes
sorry, Bill, but
and
could you
start
draw your
pointing
remarks to a
at the
close?
government that has caused this problem. Thank you. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much, Bill. As you heard Michael referring to in his speech, I did receive a motion for reference back to this motion. It was out of order under Standing Order 11.2a, as it did not clearly state why a reference back would have a different effect to voting against the motion. So we're now going to move to a series of votes. The online voting is already open. I would like you to, if you are seated and ready, raise your hands if you wish to vote in favour of Amendment 1, please. Okay, thank you. And any against Amendment 1? Yeah, I can see a couple. And the online is very clear as well, so that amendment is clearly carried. So we're now going to move to a vote on the motion as amended. Can I see all those in favour of the motion as amended? Thank you very much. And can I see all those against, please? Okay, so I've got 2 in the hall and 2 online against. Everybody else is in favour. That tells me that that motion is very clearly carried. I'd like to thank my aides, Fraser Graham, and my hall aide, Lucas North, and apologise to all the people I couldn't call in this oversubscribed and sadly truncated debate because we were running over. Please bear with us as we reset the stage in preparation for the appeal and the leader's speech. Thank you.